So my mic seems to be on. So usually I speak to guided groups and I have to raise my voice, so I will try to not do that, just to dim it a little bit down. Thank you very much for this honor to be here. Anders and me met last year in Antwerp, in Belgium, and he said, well, can you tell us about history in your company, but not so much about the history of the company, but more a little bit strategy. And this is why I am talking less about the history of our company, which was founded in 1886, but and which was established in Sweden in 1904, so which is a couple of years ago. But I will talk a little bit about what we are doing and what our function inside of the company is. And I would like to start with my short lecture about balancing in the middle, and that means to be a marketer of history without losing my credibility as a historian. So this is the balance which I'm talking about. And to give you a little impression of what I'm talking about, there are several questions. First, what the company, what are we doing, how we proceed, our mixture of history and communication. You know, the name of the department I'm working for is Historical Communications, and this is now ancient tongue, but it just says that we are both archives and a part of the communications department in our company. And so that means that we are in charge of safeguarding history as well as telling stories. Well, just to give you a short impression about the company, we have around about 421 people working for the company worldwide, and this is a lot of stakeholders. So we are a team of 7 people with different functions, and we have 421 potential customers, and this is quite a lot. We are sometimes struggling to help all with their requests, and sometimes we have real wonderful highlights, like, for example, this year, 120 years of Bosch in the UK, including a gala dinner, including a book, including an exhibition, or to be honest, it was 3 exhibitions on different places in London, and we needed to set up the history again for this region in Great Britain, and had a lot of work to do, but we always try not to lose our connection to the basic work of archiving, because without archiving carefully, you cannot tell stories. Well, we have around about 468 entities in the world. To be honest, we do not cover all entities of the company. So we are in charge of the German headquarters as well as our business units. But we have a so-called satellites. For example, the Bosch India Archival Center. We have archival centers in big countries, because it starts with the characters. You cannot read, I cannot read Korean, Chinese, or Japanese, and so we have to find people who can do the work for us in order to safeguard the company's history internationally. Just to give you a short impression of the share, Europe is around about 50%, Asia Pacific around about a third, and the Americas 18%. And you see the company has a global setup, and unfortunately we only have our exhibition on Bosch history in Stuttgart at the headquarters, but during the pandemic we established virtual live guided tours, and today we have a lot of fans in Brazil, for example, in Costa Rica, as well as in India, who like to join our virtual tours, so we can spread the spirit of the company's founder and what is behind the name Bosch to much more people than before the pandemic. So it was a little advantage that. So, and you see the 4 business sectors of the company. Most of all is located under the hood of a car, which means 60% of the turnover. And so it's sometimes not so easy to be a representative of a so-called hidden champion, because not so many people may know Bosch as they know traditional consumer goods, for example. But fortunately, we do have household appliances and power tools. And before I entered Bosch in 1998, what I knew were refrigerators and power tools, of course, and not what is hidden in the car. To come to the point where all started, the archives was founded in January 1st, 1933. And the management became aware that there was an anniversary which would take place in 1936, a couple of years later, as well as the 75th birthday of the company's founder, Robert Bosch. By the way, you see him on a boat in Sweden. I've tried to mix in some Swedish pictures which I found in the archive. He loved to go fishing. The company started with only one historian who tried to collect everything which was collected in different places in the company. As we have abbreviations in the company, some of you might know that from there, it was called MUA, Museum and Archive, Museum und Archiv, but it was never established because after World War II, the money had to be invested in different ways. And as to the present day, we still do not have a museum, but we have an exhibition room which we use for guided tours, but which is not open to the public. There were rough decades for the archives. Differing people in charge and management mean different interests into history. And there were even people who thought, well, why do we need history? Do we need it for identification? Do we need it for pushing up our turnover? And the situation was rather bad in the 1950s to the 1960s. And the beginning of professionalization came in the 1990s when the first professional historian was engaged for the company. By the way, what you see is a shop window in Stockholm in the 1930s. Special, I think, Tändstift is spark plug as well, as far as I know. And around about 20 years ago, the company started to integrate history into the communication department. And that meant we had to continue collecting things which are very important for the company, can be exhibited or can be just time witnesses for several innovations of the company for different situations the company was in. And in the recent years, we have established several regional archives that can safeguard the history items of the local areas. For example, in China, we have around about 50,000 people working for the company, and they have their own archivists, but it's only a 20% capacity, unfortunately. You need to safeguard very carefully in order to be able to make stories out of history. By the way, also 2 pictures from Sweden showing our northern Sweden test tracks at the Polar Circle. Left, there were some guys I have interviewed. Some of them are beyond the 80s, and they tested ABS, anti-lock braking system prototypes in the mid-1970s. What we are trying to do is first set up a website, but a website is usually something which is static, which doesn't change that fast. And this was why we decided to find some new ways to engage people for Bosch history with setting up our Bosch history blog. You see the starting page on the right side. There were no blueprint for that. We didn't know how to do that, but we had social media experts in our company, which helped us to roll out it. And so it's now 7 years old. Sometimes it comes to my mind, well, can't we change the business model and do something else on the blog? But it turned out to be very successful because these contents can be shared by our colleagues all over the world. I haven't counted the different social media channels which Bosch is operating, but there are many entities who use Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and as well Instagram accounts. I think all over it's more than 1,200, and every entity can use that or reuse our contents. And we try to set up them in a strategic way. And I would like to say some word about that. For example, we can give ideas. It's not only that we follow communication campaigns of our company, but we also say, well, couldn't we take that topic, for example? For example, this house is an example for a sustainability topic, because that was set up by our home comfort branch in 1977, and it could save up to 90% energy because it had solar technology, and it had a heat pump and only an auxiliary gas heating system. And so we introduced that topic in order to help our communications colleague to find connections between history and current, present and future-oriented campaigns. So that is a proper way to be in the business of doing communications campaigns without losing the contact. Because it's very important to make sure that people are aware of the importance of history, and some are only aware of it if you offer them to integrate your topics into current campaigns of the company. And you also have to safeguard the products, for example. Just to give you a rough impression, we have around about 2.2 kilometers of paper records and terabytes of data, and we have around about 16,000 different products. The smallest is a micromechanic sensor, which is 1.6 millimeter, and the hugest one is a self-driving car, which was tested in California within the last 10 years. And unfortunately, this one we gave to the Deutsches Museum in Munich, and they don't want to give it back. It's a prototype. Of course, they won't give it back. It's a prototype of a gasoline electric hybrid Ford Escort, 44 horsepower, and it could drive electrically. It could be reloaded, and it could drive with an internal combustion engine. And it is a pioneering example of testing new technologies. And the more I got into the archives of our company, the more I found out that people from time to time tried out new things and came to the point where they noticed the market is not yet mature for these new innovations. And for example, also Bosch introduced the first self-driving truck in 1993. It's funny to see. You can even see it on YouTube. Unfortunately, I haven't it with me. You can see a truck driver sitting reading the newspaper while the car drives, and it even had a navigation system. And so these are ways to express our pioneering and innovation-oriented history. And this also shows that we have to think in two directions. We have to enhance the reputation of the company, outside of Bosch, and we also have to strengthen the identification of the people with the company. And to do this, we also try to keep in contact with contemporary topics. I would like to give you a short example for that. During the pandemic, Bosch first started to develop breathing devices, which was not continued. The company developed rapid PCR tests, and the company produced masks for their own needs within the company. You may remember there were lack of masks, they were extremely expensive, and so Bosch set up a manufacturing line for protection mask within 6 weeks with different experts from research development, doctors, as well as production specialists. And they set up a mask production in Stuttgart, the second one in Nanganatapura in India, and the third one in Juarez in Mexico. And we have the first mask. It's a quite new item because it's only 4 years old. And we also have parts of the production setting, only small parts because the whole one would be by far too huge for us. And we use that for communication, which helps people being proud working for the company. So this is what we were doing. This was our contribution to that. Just to give you an example of how it can work, I have a LinkedIn channel, and when I post something, I get around about 5,000 to 10,000 reactions over a longer period. And in the case of the mask production, I got 120,000. And 95% of them were colleagues from India who were involved or knew about the mask production. So it was also a great opportunity to strengthen the corporate loyalty of people within the company. By the way, this is Robert Bosch. We have 2 deciding targets in communication. The first one is to integrate history into corporate communications as a reputation driver, for example. And it has the potential to lead people to higher loyalty to the company, to have a sort of you can't say that with more than 400,000 people, but a sort of family feeling. And in fact, sometimes we have it. I don't know why, but it's there, different from country to country. And the second target is to be constantly in a process of communications. For example, we have a roundtable of all people from digital communications, external, internal, and I am also a part of them. And it's a sort of a pulse check. What are we doing? What could be helpful? Do we need some more communication focus on sustainability, or a little bit more on innovation? And I can give the examples how we can help with history. When we talk about the semiconductor, you see a 300 millimeter semiconductor, which is then split into 10,000 of microchips. And when Bosch set up the semiconductor factory in Dresden, in Germany, I started a time witness series about the pioneering years of microelectronics, and I found out that there is still a pioneer of the late 1960s living. He celebrated his 100th birthday last year, and I interviewed him in his older people's residence in the recent years in order to have an identification figure for the people, somebody who was really pioneering. He knew nothing about integrated circuits. He had to read patent publications and had to uninstall electronic devices in order to find out more about electronics. So it was very, very basic what they did in the first years of pioneering innovation times. And I come to the last point of my presentation now. When I usually set up a blog entry on Bosch history, whatever it deals with, which region or which product branch, say, well, we cannot do it twice or 3 times or even more, but our colleagues from online communication say, well, the internet doesn't forget anything at all, but the readers forget after a couple of months or years. And so you can push in a topic from time to time for another time, and you can do it all over the different channels. We have no historical channel on Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn, but we exchange our content with the so-called Bosch Global channels, which guarantee us the widest range or reach. And when we look at the outcome, for example, in 2021, we published 66 posts, or our colleagues of digital communication, with a quite huge reach. I don't know where they have the number from, but I have to believe them. And we found out that history posts are some of the most successful. You may think that celebrating the 162nd birthday of our company founder is nothing quite thrilling. So we celebrated it on September 23, but it became used on social media or reused on social media with a link to our blog post. It became one of the 3 most successful blog posts which Bosch posted in the social media in the whole year. And so you see, history is fascinating, and especially with a company founder with straight principles and values like Robert Bosch had. And what is interesting here is to see that Instagram seems to turn out to be the most interactive channel to be used by people. Bosch stepped in quite late. I was not sure what the reason behind was, but the company was a pioneer in Twitter and in Facebook and as well as in LinkedIn. But Instagram turned out to be I would say exploding, and a very interactive channel. And to come to a short result, what are we doing? What are we doing it for? What is our path we have to go? And it's a sort of balancing in the middle between archiving, doing honest and truth-oriented historians' work, and also talk positive about the positive parts of the history. We should not leave out the dark side of our company. And this is also part of the historian's work, because if we only talk about the positive things, from my point of view, it's a little bit too much history marketing. So we should have both in consideration. And what I really pray to our executives is, please also talk about the failures of the company, because the failures were pushing forces which brought the company forward later. And even a crisis. Crisis in ancient Greek doesn't mean bad situation, but means decision. So going into a certain direction after a very tough situation that the company had to face. And this is why I look in the mirror every morning and ask myself, am I honest enough as a historian? Do I find the right balance between marketing and the work as a historian and archivist. And the first day I say no, I should think if my job is still the right for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dietrich. I'm sure we have time for some questions. And I'll throw in the first question. When is it the most difficult to find that balance?
If I am a marketer of history, I would tend to talk about only the success of the company. And it was just the last thing I pointed out. If I talk about the failures, you can preach to people, please also do that. Do not leave out the critical situations of the company. We can point out the power of the company to find new power out of critical situations. So I studied history also in order to talk about things that might be sort of negative in terms of communications. And I have to balance that because I am a loyal member of staff of the company, to be honest. So it's not a negative I have the focus on, but I have to take it into consideration. And the last time I had a member of a board of management, he asked me how many situations of a crisis we had in our company history. And I said, well, I counted recently, and I found out it was 11. So the first one was in 1892, after 6 years, when Robert Bosch was almost not able anymore to pay the wages for his workers on Friday afternoon in cash, and so he had to pick up some money from the rich vegetable dealer in the front house. So he had invested too much, he had spent too much money into machinery, and so he went into a critical situation. But he learned from that, and this is important.
Yeah. Questions?
What is the corporate language of Bosch? Do you use English throughout, or German, or are you multi-language? And how do you handle the archives and the blogs and so on? If you have artifacts in German from the beginning, how do you certify the translations and so on if you present it in English?
Good question. We just recently talked about it this morning. The colleague. As I'm in charge of historical topics in Asia Pacific, Australia, I write more than 80% of my emails in English with colleagues, and most of presentations are done in English because it's a common international language in our company. Yes, most of the oldest artifacts that we have, including Robert Bosch's letters and his diary from his first voyage to America, are in German. And usually we have an agency that translates, and then we have an internal native speaker from England who makes sure that the translation is appropriate. We have, of course, many of our internet or social media posts are also being used in different questions spoken all over the world. And to be honest, I have to trust the people that they translate it in the right spirit and to bring over the meaning which we had intended to.
Thank you so much, Dietrich, for this. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.